The night I thought my life was falling apart was the same night someone quietly began putting it back together. Rain hit the pavement so hard it looked like the entire city was dissolving beneath the storm. Water streamed down the windows of every passing car. Streetlights blurred into golden streaks. Thunder rolled somewhere above the skyline, low and distant, like a warning nobody wanted to hear. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and kept walking. There was nowhere else to go. My shoes were soaked. My hands were numb. The cold rain had already soaked through my clothes, but I barely noticed anymore. When your mind is carrying too much, your body eventually stops complaining. It simply follows along. I checked the time on my phone. 8:47. The battery flashed red. 3%. Perfect. Another problem to add to the list. The wind pushed against me as I crossed another block. My apartment was still nearly 2 miles away. Normally, I would have called a rideshare. Normally, I would have stopped somewhere warm. Normally, I would have made better choices. But nothing about that night felt normal. My head ached. I had skipped lunch. Then dinner. My last real meal had been sometime the day before. Teaching elementary school usually left me tired. Lately, it left me exhausted. Parent meetings. Budget cuts. Endless paperwork. A landlord raising rent. Bills arriving faster than paychecks. Every small problem had somehow decided to arrive at the same time. I kept telling myself things would improve. That if I worked harder, worried less, smiled more, somehow everything would fix itself. The rain disagreed. I stopped beneath a flickering street lamp and leaned against a brick wall. Just for a second. Just long enough to catch my breath. My vision blurred. The street seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. I closed my eyes. Bad idea. The world immediately felt heavier. A car passed nearby. Then another. Water splashed against the curb. Somewhere a siren echoed through the storm. Everything sounded distant. Muffled. Like I was hearing life through several closed doors. I pushed away from the wall and tried to keep walking. One step. Then another. Then another. My knees felt weak. My breathing became shallow. The city lights stretched and twisted in front of me. Suddenly the sidewalk did not seem completely steady anymore. I remember reaching for a nearby railing. I remember missing it. After that, everything became darkness. The next thing I noticed was warmth. Soft warmth. The kind that slowly reaches you after being cold for too long. My eyes opened reluctantly. For several seconds, I had no idea where I was. Leather seats. Dim interior lighting. The faint scent of expensive cologne. Rain tapping gently against tinted windows. I blinked several times. Confused. Disoriented. A dark coat rested across my shoulders. The car was moving smoothly through the city. Panic immediately rushed through me. I sat upright too quickly. Easy. The voice came from beside me. Calm. Deep. Controlled. I turned my head. A man sat across from me in the rear compartment of the vehicle. Dark hair. Sharp features. Expensive suit. Gray eyes that seemed strangely focused despite the storm outside. Every instinct told me I should be afraid. Yet somehow I was not. The stranger studied me for a moment before speaking again. His voice remained quiet. Steady. Certain. You fainted in the rain. My throat felt dry. Where am I? In my car. Not the most reassuring answer. He seemed to realize that. A faint smile touched his expression. Then he reached forward and adjusted the coat resting around my shoulders. The gesture was simple. Respectful. Unexpectedly gentle. Outside, thunder rolled across the city once more. Inside the car, everything felt strangely calm. The man held my gaze for several seconds before speaking 4 words that would change everything. You are safe now. And somehow, despite every reason not to believe him, I did. My fingers remained wrapped around the edge of the leather seat long after the panic should have faded. The car moved smoothly through the rain while city lights drifted across the windows like blurred stars. Every sensible thought told me to be cautious. I was alone in a stranger's vehicle. A stranger who somehow looked completely comfortable in a situation that felt impossible to me. Yet nothing about him seemed threatening. That only made me more suspicious. Who are you? I finally asked. The man glanced toward me. Damien Russo. The name meant something. Not immediately. Then suddenly. Newspaper headlines. Business articles. Charity events. Rumors whispered around the city. The kind of man people recognized even if they had never met him. My stomach tightened. Damien Russo? A faint smile touched his expression. Usually, that is the reaction. The reaction is usually fear? Curiosity. He leaned back slightly. Sometimes concern. Despite everything, I almost laughed. The warmth inside the vehicle was making it difficult to hold on to my panic. I adjusted the coat around my shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Where are you taking me? Somewhere warm. That is not an address. No, it is not. I stared at him. He stared back. The frustrating part was how calm he remained. Finally, he reached toward a small compartment beside him and removed a bottle of water. Drink. I am not thirsty. You fainted. He handed me the bottle anyway. You are thirsty. Annoyingly, he was right. I took a small sip. Then another. My body immediately seemed grateful for it. Damien watched quietly as if confirming something. Outside, the storm continued hammering the city. Inside, the silence felt strangely comfortable. A few minutes later, the car turned through large iron gates and entered a private property. My eyes widened slightly. The driveway curved through manicured gardens illuminated by soft landscape lighting. The house beyond was enormous. Elegant rather than flashy. Warm light glowed through tall windows. This is where you live? I asked. Sometimes. That answer raised even more questions. Before I could ask them, the vehicle stopped beneath a covered entrance. One of the drivers stepped out to open the door. Damien remained seated. You can stay here tonight, he said. Every alarm in my head immediately activated. No, his eyebrow lifted. No, I cannot. Why? Because accepting help felt dangerous. Because depending on anyone terrified me. Because I had spent years convincing myself I could survive alone. None of those answers sounded reasonable when spoken aloud. I do not know you. Damien nodded slowly. Fair. To my surprise, he did not argue. He simply removed a business card from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. Then let me make this easier. I looked down at the card. His name. His number. Nothing else. The guest house is empty. You will have privacy. Food. Dry clothes. A warm bed. His voice softened slightly. And tomorrow morning, if you still want to leave, I will personally arrange transportation anywhere you choose. The offer sounded so reasonable that it became difficult to reject. Thunder echoed outside once more. Rain continued pouring from the sky. I looked toward the mansion. Then back at Damien. He waited patiently. No pressure. No expectation. Just patience. And somehow that made the decision harder. Because for the first time in months, someone was offering help without asking for anything in return. The guest house was quieter than any place I had slept in for months. I noticed that immediately. No traffic outside the window. No neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. No buzzing anxiety waiting beside the bed. Just silence. Real silence. The kind that felt unfamiliar. I woke slowly the next morning beneath soft blankets, momentarily forgetting where I was. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Birds moved through the gardens outside. For several peaceful seconds, I simply stared at the ceiling. Then everything came rushing back. The storm. The car. Damien Russo. I sat up quickly. A folded set of clothes rested on a nearby chair. Beside them sat a small note. Breakfast whenever you are ready. No pressure. The handwriting was neat. Simple. Somehow that last part caught my attention more than anything else. No pressure. Most of my life recently had felt like pressure. Pressure to keep working. Pressure to keep smiling. Pressure to pretend everything was under control. Seeing those two words felt strangely comforting. After showering and changing, I stepped outside and followed a stone path through the gardens. The property looked even larger in daylight. Flowering trees lined the walkways. Fountains reflected the morning sun. Everything seemed carefully designed to create peace. I found Damien sitting alone on a terrace overlooking a lake behind the estate. A cup of coffee rested beside him. Another waited across the table. "Good morning," he said calmly. "Good morning. How do you feel?" Embarrassed. One corner of his mouth lifted. That is an improvement. Despite myself, I smiled. The coffee smelled amazing. I sat down cautiously and wrapped my hands around the warm cup. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt easy rather than awkward. Eventually, Damien looked toward the water. "You were walking alone during a storm. I noticed. You had not eaten." "Apparently not. Your phone battery was almost dead." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" When someone collapses, details become important. The answer should have unsettled me. Instead, it made sense. Damien studied problems the way other people studied books. Carefully. Thoroughly. Nothing seemed to escape his attention. "You ask a lot of questions," I said. "Occupational habit. And what exactly is your occupation?" For the first time, genuine amusement appeared in his eyes. "Complicated." I laughed softly. "That is not an answer. It is the safest answer." "Fair enough." The conversation drifted toward easier topics after that. My students. Teaching. Favorite books. Childhood memories. Hours seemed to pass surprisingly quickly. Yet throughout every conversation, I noticed something. Damien never pushed. Never demanded explanations. Never asked about the reasons behind my exhaustion. Most people would have. Most people would have wanted answers immediately. He seemed content to wait. That should have made me relax. Instead, it made me curious. Because people with patience usually knew something others did not. As the afternoon sun settled across the lake, Damien's phone buzzed briefly. He glanced at the screen. Something changed behind his eyes. Not concern. Not surprise. Recognition. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward me thoughtfully. Then he asked a question so simple it nearly stole my breath. "Hannah, what exactly are you running from?" The question settled between us like a stone dropped into still water. I stared across the lake because it felt easier than looking at him. The sunlight danced across the surface while a gentle breeze moved through the trees. Everything around us seemed peaceful. My thoughts were not. "That is a complicated question," I finally said. Damien nodded once. I expected that. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup even though the drink had long since cooled. "What if I do not want to answer?" "Then do not." The response came immediately. No disappointment. No frustration. Just acceptance. Somehow that made it harder to stay silent. Most people pushed. Most people demanded explanations. Damien simply waited. The longer he waited, the more I found myself wanting to speak. I looked down at the table. "Have you ever reached a point where you felt tired all the time?" I asked quietly. "Not physically." His voice remained calm. "But yes." I swallowed hard. "That is what it feels like. Like I am constantly trying to keep everything together." For the first time, I allowed myself to say it aloud. The words came slowly at first. Then faster. Teaching. Bills. Endless responsibilities. The pressure of always being the dependable person. The one who solved problems. The one who smiled. The one who never asked for help. "Everyone assumes I have everything under control," I admitted. "Sometimes I let them believe it because I do not know what else to do." Damien listened without interrupting. Not once. And eventually, I continued, "You get so used to carrying everything alone that you forget there is another option." Silence followed. The kind that did not need filling. Finally, Damien leaned back in his chair. "That sounds exhausting." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "It is." "Then maybe it is time to stop carrying all of it by yourself." The simplicity of the statement nearly brought tears to my eyes. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Later that afternoon, I decided to leave. At least for a few hours. I needed to check on my apartment. Return messages. Pretend my normal life still existed. Damien did not argue. He simply arranged transportation and handed me his business card again before I left. "Call if you need anything." "I probably will not." One eyebrow lifted. That was not convincing. I smiled despite myself. The drive back into the city felt different than it had before. Lighter somehow. Yet the moment I stepped inside my apartment building, the familiar tension returned. The narrow hallways, the flickering lights, the overwhelming feeling that life was waiting to collapse on top of me again. Inside my apartment, a stack of unopened envelopes sat on the kitchen counter. Bills, notices, problems I had been avoiding for weeks. My chest tightened immediately. The peace I found by the lake seemed very far away. Then my phone buzzed. One message. Unknown, how to relax yet? I stared at the screen. Somehow Damien always seemed to know exactly when I needed a distraction. I typed back before I could overthink it. Not even a little. The response arrived seconds later. That can be fixed. I smiled for the first time since returning home. And for reasons I could not explain, the apartment suddenly felt a little less lonely. The next 3 days passed in a strange balance between chaos and calm. My life still contained all the same problems. The bills remained on the counter. The school budget issues still existed. My apartment still felt too small and my bank account still felt too empty. Yet somehow everything seemed easier to face. Maybe because I no longer felt completely alone. Damien's messages arrived at random times throughout the day. Did you eat lunch? How many hours did you sleep? Tell me something good that happened today. The questions were simple, almost ridiculous. Yet I found myself answering every one of them. By Thursday evening, I was grading student assignments at my kitchen table when my phone rang unexpectedly. The number on the screen made my stomach tighten. I had been avoiding that call for weeks. A property management representative. I already knew what the conversation would be about. Rent. Deadlines. Warnings. More pressure. I answered anyway. 10 minutes later, I sat staring at the wall in complete silence. The situation was worse than I thought. My lease would not be renewed. The building was changing ownership. Tenants were being given limited time to find alternative housing. I thanked the representative politely, then ended the call. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than ever. My chest tightened. My hands shook slightly. For months, I had been managing one problem at a time. Now another one had arrived before I solved the first. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes doing nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Damien. How was your day? I stared at the screen. Normally, I would have replied with the same answer I always gave everyone. Fine. Everything is fine. Instead, my fingers moved before I could stop them. Not great. The response came almost immediately. What happened? I hesitated. Then I told him. Not every detail. Just enough. The housing issue. The uncertainty. The exhaustion. After I finished typing, I immediately regretted it. I should not have burdened him with my problems. Several minutes passed without a response. Then my phone rang. Damien. I answered. Hello. Where are you? The question caught me off guard. At home. Good. His voice remained calm. Controlled. Stay there. Damien, I am coming over. Before I could argue, the call ended. 40 minutes later, a black vehicle pulled into the parking lot outside my building. I watched from the window as Damien stepped out carrying 2 paper bags. Somehow that sight alone eased part of the panic sitting inside my chest. A few minutes later, he sat across from me at my tiny kitchen table. The contrast was almost comical. One of the most powerful men in the city sitting beside a stack of elementary school worksheets while unpacking takeout containers. You did not have dinner, he said. How do you know? Because you never eat when you are worried. I blinked. The fact that he already knew that about me felt strangely personal. We ate quietly for a while. Eventually, I looked around the apartment. The peeling paint. The cramped space. The uncertainty hanging over everything. I do not know what to do, I admitted. The words felt heavier than anything I had said before. Damien set down his fork. His eyes met mine. Steady. Certain. Then he spoke 5 words that somehow made the room feel safer. You do not have to. For several seconds, I simply stared at him. The words sounded impossible. Not because they were dramatic. Because nobody had ever said them to me before. My entire adult life had been built around solving my own problems. Working harder. Worrying quietly. Carrying responsibilities until they became too heavy and then pretending they were not. The idea of someone stepping in felt unfamiliar. Dangerous, even. Damien, I said carefully, this is my problem. I know. Then why are you acting like it is yours? He leaned back slightly in the chair and studied me with that calm expression that somehow made every conversation feel important. Because you called me. I texted you. Same difference. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. Unfortunately, he had a point. Out of everyone in my life, he had been the person I reached for when things fell apart. That realization surprised me almost as much as it did him. Damien stood and carried our empty containers into the kitchen. The sight was strangely amusing. The powerful man whose name appeared in business magazines washing takeout containers in my tiny apartment sink. You know, I said, most people would hire someone to do that. Most people are missing out on valuable life experiences. I laughed to spite myself. The tension in the room eased immediately. When he returned to the table, he placed a folder in front of me. I frowned. What is this? Information. I opened it carefully. Apartment listings. Neighborhood maps. Rental information. Transportation details. My eyes widened. When did you do this? While driving over. That was less than an hour ago. I had help. Of course he did. The folder contained more useful information than I had managed to gather during 3 stressful weeks of searching on my own. Every property was within my budget. Every location was near the school where I worked. Every detail had already been organized. I flipped through the pages in disbelief. You did all this because of one text message? Damien shrugged. You sounded worried. The answer was so simple that it left me speechless. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my school principal. My stomach immediately tightened. I opened it expecting another problem. Instead, I froze. Hannah, good news. The district approved additional funding this afternoon. Several staff support programs are being restored next semester. Relief washed through me so suddenly that I nearly laughed. For weeks, teachers had worried about budget cuts and reduced resources. Now everything had changed. What happened? Damien asked. I showed him the message. His expression remained perfectly neutral. Too neutral. Suspiciously neutral. I narrowed my eyes. You know something. I know many things. Damien. A faint smile appeared. It is good news. Did you have anything to do with this? The school received funding. That is not an answer. His smile widened slightly. You are becoming very observant. I shook my head and laughed. Yet deep down, I suspected the answer already. Damien never announced his actions. He simply created solutions and quietly stepped aside. The rest of the evening passed more peacefully than any evening had in months. For the first time, the future did not feel like a wall rushing toward me. It felt open, manageable, possible. Later, after Damien left, I stood by my apartment window watching city lights flicker beneath the night sky. My phone buzzed one final time. Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. I smiled at the screen, then typed back. Why? The response arrived almost immediately. Because tomorrow we are finding you a new home. The next morning began with sunlight instead of rain. That alone felt unusual. I stood by my apartment window holding a cup of coffee while the city slowly woke beneath a clear blue sky. For the first time in weeks, I had actually slept through the night. No anxiety. No endless thoughts racing through my head. Just rest. My phone buzzed precisely at 8 o'clock. I smiled before even checking the screen. Ready? The message was from Damien. I typed back immediately. For what? 3 dots appeared. Then vanished. Then returned. House hunting. Do not pretend you forgot. 45 minutes later, I was sitting beside him in the back of a black SUV moving through the city. A folder rested on his lap. Another rested beside me. How many places are we seeing? I asked. 5. 5. You need options. You sound like a real estate agent. That is deeply insulting. I laughed. The sound seemed to satisfy him. The first apartment was beautiful. The second was even better. By the third, I began to suspect something unusual. Every location somehow matched exactly what I wanted. Natural light. Quiet neighborhoods. Reasonable commutes. Affordable rent. This cannot be a coincidence, I finally said. Damien glanced toward me. What cannot? These apartments. They are apartments. They are my apartments. One eyebrow lifted. Your apartments? Not literally. I pointed toward the latest listing. This has every feature I mentioned last week. Good memory. Damien. A faint smile appeared. I listen. The simple answer lingered with me longer than it should have. Because he really did. He remembered details most people forgot within minutes. Favorite coffee orders. Stories about my students. The names of children in my classroom. Things I had mentioned once and never repeated. Listening seemed as natural to him as breathing. By late afternoon, we arrived at the final property. The moment I stepped inside, I stopped walking. Large windows overlooked a small public park. Sunlight filled every room. Bookshelves lined one wall. A reading nook sat beside the living room window. The space felt warm, comfortable, peaceful. It felt like somewhere I could breathe. Damien watched my reaction carefully. You like this one? It was not a question. Maybe. That means yes. I turned slowly in the center of the room. It feels different. Different how? I searched for the right words. Then finally found them. It feels safe. The moment the sentence left my mouth, something changed in Damien's expression. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. A quiet understanding passed between us. The same word. Safe. The same feeling that had followed me since the storm. Later that evening, after paperwork and phone calls and far more decisions than I expected, Damien and I sat together on a bench overlooking the park outside the apartment. The sky glowed orange and gold as the sun disappeared beyond the city skyline. Can I ask you something? I said quietly. You always do. I smiled. Why did you stop that night? Damien looked toward the fading sunlight. For a moment, he seemed far away, lost somewhere inside an old memory. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Because once, a long time ago, someone needed help. I waited. And I was not there. Silence settled around us. The answer carried more weight than the words themselves. For the first time since meeting him, I understood there was a story Damien rarely told. And somehow I knew that story was about to change everything. The question stayed with me for 2 days. Because once Damien finally answered, I understood why he rarely spoke about it. We were sitting in a quiet cafe near the park when he told me the rest. Not dramatically. Not like someone sharing a secret. More like someone carefully opening a door that had remained closed for years. I had an older sister, he said. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting soft patterns across the table between us. She spent most of her life convincing everyone she was fine. My chest tightened immediately. The words felt familiar. Too familiar. Damien stirred his coffee slowly before continuing. She never wanted to burden anyone. Never wanted help. She carried everything herself. His gaze remained fixed on the cup in front of him. One day I realized how much she had been struggling. By then, she had already spent years feeling alone. Silence settled between us. I understood now. Every question he had asked me. Every moment he noticed something others overlooked. Every message reminding me to eat or rest. None of it had been random. He had seen a pattern he recognized. You think I remind you of her, I said quietly. Damien looked up. At first. The answer surprised me. At first. A faint smile appeared. Now I think you remind me of yourself. I laughed softly. That sounds confusing. It probably is. The smile remained. But it is true. Something warm settled inside my chest. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. Honest. Simple. No performance. No expectation. Later that afternoon, we walked through the park outside my future apartment building. Children played near a fountain. Families filled the walking paths. The world felt brighter than it had during the stormy night when we met. The contrast almost seemed impossible. Can I tell you something? I asked. Damien nodded. When I woke up in your car, I thought my life was falling apart. Reasonable assumption. I am serious. He smiled. So am I. I shook my head, laughing. Then my expression softened. I thought I had reached the point where everything was too much. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "And now?" Damien asked. I looked around the park. The sunlight, the trees, the ordinary beauty of a peaceful afternoon. Then I looked at him. Now I think maybe I was just tired of doing everything alone. The answer seemed to affect him more than I expected. He looked away briefly toward the fountain before speaking again. "You were never meant to." The words stayed with me long after he said them. That evening, after he drove me home, I stood inside my apartment surrounded by half-packed moving boxes. Soon I would leave this place behind. The tiny apartment, the constant stress, the feeling that every day was a battle. For the first time, the future felt exciting instead of frightening. My phone buzzed. One message. "How's the packing going?" I smiled immediately. Slowly, a response arrived. "That means terribly." I laughed out loud, then set the phone down and continued packing. Yet as I folded clothes into boxes, one realization followed me everywhere. Home was never the apartment. It was never the building. It was never the address. Home was the feeling that someone would be there when life became too heavy. And for the first time in a very long time, I finally knew what that felt like. 6 months later, the sound of rain returned. Soft, steady, familiar. I stood beside the large windows of my new apartment watching droplets slide down the glass while city lights shimmered beyond the park below. The storm was nowhere near as fierce as the one that had changed my life. Still, it made me pause. Sometimes it felt impossible that so much could happen in only half a year. My classroom was thriving. The school funding issues had stabilized. The constant pressure that once followed me everywhere had slowly disappeared. Most importantly, I no longer carried every burden alone. A knock sounded at the door. I smiled before opening it. Damien stood in the hallway holding 2 cups of coffee. "I had a feeling you would be standing by the window. That is becoming slightly concerning." "I prefer impressive." I laughed and stepped aside. Some things never changed. He handed me a cup and moved toward the living room as comfortably as if he belonged there. The truth was, he did. Somewhere along the way, his presence had become part of my life. Not through grand gestures. Not through dramatic promises. Through consistency. Through showing up. Through staying. We spent the evening talking about ordinary things. My students. His latest charity project. A community reading program we were helping organize together. The kind of conversation that would have sounded boring to anyone else. To me, it felt perfect. Later, the rain intensified outside. Thunder rolled softly across the city. Damien glanced toward the window. "You know," he said, "I still remember that night." I smiled. The storm. The storm. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked down at my coffee. I barely remember collapsing. I remember enough for both of us. His answer made me laugh quietly. Then my expression softened. "I never thanked you properly." Damien frowned immediately. "For what?" "For stopping." The room grew quiet. Rain tapped against the glass, while warm lamplight filled the apartment. Damien looked at me for several seconds before answering. "You do not owe me thanks." "I do." He shook his head gently. No, his voice remained calm. "Certain. You did the hard part." I blinked. "What hard part?" "Trusting someone." The answer settled deep inside me. Because he was right. Being rescued for a moment was easy. Learning to let someone stay was much harder. I walked toward the window and looked out at the rain. The city glowed beneath the storm exactly as it had months earlier. Yet everything felt different now. Back then, I had been exhausted. Lost. Alone. Now I felt grounded. Hopeful. Home. Damien joined me beside the glass. Neither of us spoke. We simply watched the rain together. Finally, I glanced toward him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had taken a different street that night?" A faint smile appeared. "No, why not?" He looked at me the same way he had in the back of that car months ago. Steady. Calm. Certain. Because I did not. My chest tightened with emotion. Not sadness. Gratitude. The kind that changes a person. Outside, the storm continued moving across the city. Inside, everything felt peaceful. Damien reached for my hand. I immediately intertwined my fingers with his. The rain reflected across the window while the future stretched quietly ahead of us. Then he spoke the same 4 words that had once sounded impossible to believe. You are safe now. This time I did not need convincing. I already knew.